This tutorial is going to cover the 1945 scrolling shooter game, and you can follow along with the written tutorials as well that you can download off the Moodle. But a scrolling shooter thanks its name to the fact that the game world scrolls over the screen. So for example, you've probably seen games like 1945 before. And if we go into 1945 YouTube game, it's a little bit like this. Now this is quite a cool arcade version of it. And the version that you'll be making is not entirely unlike this, but not to the same extent of graphics. So it'll be fairly simple, but you'll have the plane, this little plane that you'll be able to control, and you know, a title screen. The islands will rotate along the back there, and it's just a nice little action game. So what we're going to start off doing in this tutorial is similar to these clouds in the back, except we're going to have some water that scrolls by, and every now and then some islands are going to scroll by as well, and give the illusion of movement. So the plane isn't actually going to be moving anywhere, it's just going to be static down the bottom. It'll be able to move left and right, but by scrolling that background we're giving it the illusion of movement. So in here, the first thing we're going to do is create a background, and we're going to call it BG_water. So background water, and load this background. Now I've downloaded these files to my desktop, and scrolling shooter, resources, and the one that we want to grab is BG or water, so water.png. And we click open, and that's our sprite there. That's pretty much all we need to do for this. We've got a background that we can now use in a room. So if we go into the room, this button up the top here will create a new room, or we can right click on rooms here and click create room. By the way, if you don't see a lot of this stuff, if you don't see scripts, you'll want to go file and change it to advanced mode. The version of GameMaker I'm using doesn't have simple mode, and if it asks you to use simple mode, you probably want to get rid of that. Now the room size that I'm using, I think it defaults to 1024 by 768. I can't remember if your version will default to 800 by 600. That looks about right. I'm going to set mine to 800 by 600, and later on I might change it if it's the wrong size. So in here, backgrounds, and I want to set a background image to BG water. So I've got that water in the background. I can turn the grid off up the top, and now I can set the speed that the background's going to move. I can set it to nothing, in which case I just get a water background. But here you'll see I can set the horizontal speed, which means it'll move either to the right if I set it positive, or to the left if I set it negative. And vertical speed. If I set this negative, it will rotate, it will scroll up. And if I set it positive, it will scroll down. So I'm going to set it to 2. Now if I hit play, you'll see my room with the water in it. And that water is scrolling down. Easy. So what we're going to do to enhance this feeling of motion is add a few islands. Now to add these islands in, we're going to create a sprite, SPR island 1, and we're going to load a sprite. So in your resource folder, scrolling shooter, resources, you should have 3 different islands. Island 1, Island 2, Island 3. So I'm going to load Island 1. And I'm just going to center the sprite here and click OK. And I'll do the same thing for the other 2 sprites. Island 2, load sprite, and then go to Island 2 and center that. And then SPR Island 3, load sprite, and grab Island 3. Center that. Okay, so I've got those 3 sprites there. Now we're going to need to create an object for these sprites. We can't just put the sprites in the room. All sprites do is they're graphics that we can use to represent objects. We can use these graphics in our game, but the main part of the game is all about these objects and how these objects are going to interact with other objects. So what we're going to have to do is create those objects, and we're just going to make one. Object island 1. We're going to use the sprite island 1. And we're going to create some events here. Now these events are going to be things that will happen in the game, and when they happen, we're going to do some corresponding actions. So the first event is going to be create. What this means is when the object is created, it's going to perform these actions over here. The action that we want to do is set the direction that it moves to go down at speed 2. That's the same speed as the background. If we set it at speed 3, it's going to look like the island is moving faster than the background. It'll be a little bit trippy. So we're going to set that to speed 2 and click OK. Then we're going to add an event, and this event is going to be, let's see here, step event, step. Now to understand steps, I'll just run my room again. And I've got a frame rate counter that runs in all of my games. It's up in the top right here. A step in GameMaker is 1 frame. And this frame rate counter is showing 30 frames per second. So every second in GameMaker, there's going to be 30 steps. So what I can do is every single one of those steps, I can do some checks. What I want to do, and I'll just pop the island in the room so you can see what it's going to do at the moment. There's my island. Is this island is going to move down at speed 2. So we can see it moves down at speed 2. But what I want to do is when it gets to the bottom and outside of the screen, I want to make it pop back at the top at a different location. Okay, and that will give it kind of like I'm floating over multiple little islands or a little archipelago or something like that. So at the moment, it's constantly down. It just still exists, but it's way off the screen. I can't see it. So let's go into Object Island 1, and we're going to add a step event. And we're going to test a variable. We're going to test the location of the object. So that's this one here, variables. Now variables are going to hold a value. Some objects will have, or all objects will have a variable built in. And one of those variables built in is the XY coordinate system of that object. So what we can do is we can test if the Y variable, or the Y position of the object, is greater than the room underscore height. This is a variable that holds the height of the room. These are special names in GameMaker. If I just type room height without that underscore, it's not going to mean anything. If I type room height with a space, it doesn't mean anything. Room underscore height is a special variable that stores the height. In my case, it is 600. So if the Y is greater than the room height, greater than the room height, then I am going to make it jump to a position. So that's this one over here in the Move tab, jump to a position. And I can set its XY coordinates. I'm going to set its Y coordinates to -16. Actually, I'll set it to -40. What that's going to do is just going to make sure that it starts outside and above the room rather than being suddenly popping into existence at the top. And then I'm going to put in a little function here called random. The random function will allow me to pick a value from 0 all the way up to the number I type in these brackets. So I'm going to type in room width. And I'll click OK. So I go into my room here. And what should happen, this should scroll down. And when it gets off the screen, so the Y value is greater than the value of the room, it should go, okay, let's jump back up to the top. So set Y to -40 and pick a random position for the X from here all the way across to here. And let's test what happens. So that goes down. And then pops up. Now you'll notice that it sort of disappears from the bottom down here. That's not a big deal because we're actually going to have a HUD that covers this bottom area a little bit later. But the reason it does that is because the center of the object is where its XY coordinates are. So if that center of the object goes greater than the Y value that we've set, which is the room height, which is 600, then it will trigger that event and do it. So now we got to do the other objects. Now this is easy because what we can do is create another object, obj island2, use sprite island2, but then I can just parent that object. Oops, I can't create parent and select object island1 as its parent. Now, similar to the way genetics work, children are going to inherit a lot of traits from their parents. And in here, child objects inherit all the traits of their parents. Except if we override something, so if we override the parent sprite with this sprite, it's going to have its own sprite there. So let's go into here and make another one and call it object island3 and sprite island3 and make its parent sprite island1 or object island1, sorry. And I'll put these objects in my room. I'm going to space them out a little bit. So let's click here and select the object I want and here. So I'm just going to space them going down. It doesn't matter where they are going across. Okay, and I'll hit play. So now that goes up there. Because it's inherited all that code from its parent, I don't have to recode it. I can just use that code again. And it's popping back up the top. This part is working fine. All right, so I'm going to go on to the next part, and that's creating our player character. So we've made the background, we've got that working. We're going to create our player character. So let's import a sprite. SPR my plane. Now there's no reason why, in terms of code, why I have to write this underscore in here. The only reason is that it's a convention to do so. You should call things by what they are, their type, as a prefix, and then underscore, and then my underscore plane. So separate words with underscores. I'm going to load a sprite, and for this we're going to scroll down to my plane strip 3. Actually, we're not going to do that. We're going to edit sprite. So we'll have to have a look and see which one is it. It is this one that we want to use, and we click open. Okay, so it has 3 sprites on it, so it's actually got a little animation associated with it, which is quite cool. So you can view that animation by clicking edit and click show preview. It's got little propellers that spin around here. I do want to use precise collision detection at the moment. Oh no, I can untick that. I'll leave it for the time being. And I want to use the center of this. And I click OK. Now I need to create an object that goes with that. So object underscore my underscore plane, using that sprite. And we're going to have some different events here. So we're going to have some control events. Add event, keyboard, left key. Add event, keyboard, right key. Add event, keyboard, up key. Add event, keyboard, down key. With these here, I want to make sure that I can move the plane to the left, but I'm not going to be able to move it off the screen. I want to be able to move it to the right, but I'm not going to be able to move it off the screen. So let's just look at that first one. When I push left, what I'm going to do is check, test a variable. Now the way that this works, it's saying if I'm going to text the X variable, that's the left and right position of the plane. If it's greater than, and I'm going to say greater than 32. Okay, it means it's not going to, it's going to be the maximum position it can be is 32 pixels off the left side of the screen. It sounds like a lot, it's not much at all really. So if the X value is greater than or equal to 33, I think your version might only have greater than. So greater than 32. If X is greater than 32, I'm going to do the next instruction. Otherwise, I won't do anything. And that instruction is going to be jump to position. it's going to be -4 relative. If I just say -4, I showed you what happened in class the other day. It'll just put it on that very left-hand side of the screen, or actually off the screen, and you won't be able to do anything with it. If we tick it relative, what it's going to do, if the X position is currently 100, it's then going to be 96, and then it's going to be 92, and then 88, and then 84, etc. So it sets it relative. It's kind of like adding or subtracting to its current position. Now I'll just repeat this for these other ones, except with this one, I'm going to do X, and the value is going to be the room width minus 32. Okay, so the other one was 0 plus 32, because 0 is the left-hand side of the screen. This is going to be the room width, which is 800 minus 32. And I'm going to make sure it's less than or equal to that. And if it is, I'm going to jump to the right, 4 relative, so positive. Let's see if that works. I'll have to put my plane in the room. And I'm just sticking it in the middle. I don't actually want it to be in the middle at the moment, but I should be able to go all the way to the left. I'm flying underneath the islands at the moment, but I can't go any more. And I can't go to the right. Why can't I go to the right? What have I done? Oh, I put it in the up bit, so I'll just change this to keyboard right. And I'll test. I'll set the depth here to -100, so it's on top. The negative value brings it up. So the lower that negative value, actually the higher it is in the hierarchy. So I can go to the left now, and I can go all the way back to the right. And it shouldn't move off the screen over here. It doesn't. So it stops there, and I can go back to the left. So I'm bound to the room, which is really cool. Now I want to get those up and down things happening. And these are going to be very similar, except they're going to be checking the Y values. So up, variable Y, it's going to have to be greater than, I'll make it greater than, I don't want it to go above a certain level, so I only really want it to go above or to halfway on the screen, which would be about 300. I could do room height divided by 2, and that would also work. I will do that one. And it's going to have to be greater than. Okay, so as long as it's greater than, then I will make it -2 on that Y, -4 I think on the Y, relative. And then for the down one, we want it to check down. So if the Y is less than, and it's going to have to be less than room height minus, I'll do 64. And there's a reason for that later. We'll probably have to change that when we put the HUD in, but we'll do -32. -32 like we did with the room width. Then we'll jump to position for 2 relative. When it goes down, we want it to go a little bit slower. So I'll just demonstrate that. Okay, so I can go down. It actually looks a bit funny. It looks like the plane is just stopped. But I can go all the way up, but I can't go beyond that point. And I can go all the way down. I might have to make it go down at speed 1, but I can't go beyond that point. If I go down at speed 1, it'll probably look a little bit more realistic, because it will look like the plane's still moving forwards. Yeah, but I'm going backwards. Okay, so it's just slowed down. That will make it harder to play, but then that kind of puts a spin on. Do you want to go too far ahead to get the enemies faster when you know that it's going to make it difficult for you to go backwards? So there's choices that will have to be made there. So we've got those up, down, left, right things checked. And I'm just going to reposition my object, my plane, down the bottom here. So it starts off down there. Next part we're going to, and this will be the final part of this video, is to add in the shooting. So I'm going to create a sprite, SPR bullet, and load a sprite, and that sprite is going to be bullet, and center that, and then I'll make an object, obj bullet, using that sprite, and when this event gets created, we're going to make it move. Okay, so we're going to set its vertical speed to 10. Its upward speed to 10. Then we're going to have another event, because if we've been playing the game for 10 minutes and we've been shooting a whole lot of bullets, we could have shot 100,000 bullets if we were really fast on the trigger. But those bullets will stay in the computer's memory and they'll keep on just flying up the screen even though we can't see them. So what we need to do is add an event that tells it when it's outside the room, then under main one, this little trash bin, destroy itself. So when it's outside the room, it's going to destroy the instance of itself. What is an instance? This here is an object or a class descriptor. It describes, in this case, the object bullet. But whenever one of those objects comes into play in the game, it's really just an instance of this class. So we can destroy that particular instance. Click OK. I'll go to My Plane, and we're going to create a shooting event. Now to do this, we don't want to be able to shoot 1,000,000 times a second. So if I just go keyboard space, create bullet 00 relative, and then run my game, well, what happens is I can do this. So it gets pretty easy because I can just kind of fly backwards and forwards and destroy everything and anything. I will have to set the depth of my bullets to be a bit higher because they're shooting underneath the islands at the moment. We don't want that. So what we want to do is we want to add a create event, and we want to create a variable that's going to hold a value. And this value is going to tell us whether we can shoot or whether we can't shoot. And whenever we shoot, we're going to change this value and then put a little timer so that it will take a little bit of time before it says we can shoot again. So let's do this in create. We're going to set a variable and we're going to call it can shoot. We're going to set it to true. So if we just type in the value true, then click OK. Set variable can shoot to true. When I push space, I'm going to check variable can shoot is equal to true. Now here's a little bit of a tricky thing. What you saw me do here, if x is greater than 32, then jump to position. I actually want to give it two commands here. If can shoot is equal to true, create an instance. I want to give it three actually. Create an instance, set can shoot to false, and set an alarm. So there's three things I need to do, but the way these purple if blocks work is it only is associated with the one directly afterwards. So what I need to do is put these little code blocks around it, and then put everything I want the if block to be associated with inside these code blocks. So if I go if can shoot equals true, then I'm going to go create the instance, set can shoot to false, and set an alarm, which is under main 2. The alarm's going to have 10 steps in it for now, and we'll adjust that whether we need to. So that's what we do. Now we add an event, alarm 0, so when that alarm triggers, we're going to set can shoot back to true. So it's going to take us 10 frames, 10 clicks before we can shoot again. So I can just hold the space bar down, and I don't need to worry about tapping as fast as I can. So every 10 clicks, I can shoot a bullet. You can hear me tapping. It's actually slower to tap than it is to do that. Okay, so now I can do that. If I did it to 5, for example, so I set that alarm to 5. Okay, now I can shoot a little bit faster. We can actually use this later on to create power-ups that might speed up the bullets, or power-ups that, constantly speed up the speed that you can shoot at. So let's look at just changing that bullet here to -10. That is above the island but below the plane. So that should be all that we need to do for this first video. Make sure you file and then save and give it a proper name. Call it a 1945 game or 1945 scrolling shooter, something meaningful. The key thing to programming is making sure that you're naming stuff appropriately. So back here where I called my variable can shoot, I could have called it CS. I could have just called it A. I can't call it X because that is a reserved keyword in GameMaker. It refers to the position of the plane, but I could just call it something like that. The problem with that is I've got to be able to remember that. So by making it easy to remember and following these conventions of putting an underscore between words, I can get pretty consistent, and it's a lot easier to remember variables that I'm using in my program. So that's the code for our plane so far. Save what you've done and jump into the next video.